Long before Chicago was established as a town, it held a unique place in Native American life and culture in this area. So Chicago was the meeting place of three different ecosystems. When Native peoples first arrived in the Chicago area, they found woodlands and decent farmland to the north, prairie grasslands teeming with buffalo to the west and south, and downtown, what now is the downtown loop, was a marshy, swampy area that was incredibly teeming with life. So Native people naturally were drawn to it, but the other reason it was important was because of the portage. So what is a portage? It deals with canoes. Native peoples invented two pieces of technology that allowed for transit in North America, without which you wouldn't get very far. One, of course, being the snowshoe. The other being the birch bark canoe. And the birch bark canoe is this wonderful piece of technology. It's made from the bark of a birch tree, naturally, that is folded up into the shape of a canoe, strengthened with cedar ribs, sewn together with spruce roots and sealed with pine pitch. And it's a light, portable boat that could haul multiple people and hundreds of pounds worth of gear, yet at the end of the day it could be emptied out, picked up on your shoulders, and carried to the next waterway. So the area of Chicago has a divide. The Des Plaines River flows down from Wisconsin and hooks west to enter into the Illinois and eventually the Mississippi, while east of this divide is the Chicago and the Calumet River system, flowing east into Lake Michigan. One branch begins up here with all these little fingerling tributaries. The south branch begins down here in the Prairie and flows eastward to meet shortly before they ooze out through the sandbar into Lake Michigan. What's interesting is right there at that divide, which by nature should be somewhat dry, there were beaver dams. We're told from the French accounts that come through in the 1670s that these beavers had built large dams that dominated the landscape, and it backed up some of the water, and it made this marshy area that the early visitors to the area referred to as Mud Lake. And this lake, swampy area could be anywhere from a couple of hundred yards to a mile or so across, and that's all you had to portage your boat. So in other words, if you have a birch bark canoe and you and multiple people or hundreds of pounds worth of gear could travel from anywhere in the greater Great Lakes region, the St. Lawrence, any of the rivers that could get you to the Great Lakes, you could paddle all the way down here to this edge of Lake Michigan, down the Chicago, portage over to the Des Plaines, and then go down in the Mississippi and reach anywhere in the greater Mississippi area, including the Gulf of Mexico and the ocean. Just south of Chicago, across the river from modern-day St. Louis, was the city of Cahokia, one of the largest population centers in North America in what we would consider the medieval period. This city sees influence from all across the continent, from Mexico, from the southeast, and from the north. Copper is being traded down from Minnesota, while rice is being brought down. And in the same vein, cultures, religions, languages are mixing and crossing all through this area. And Chicago is the bottleneck through which all of this passes. Now, as Native people continue to live and travel through the Chicago area, they developed a lifestyle over many centuries that they lived here. They developed a lifestyle that was designed to live in community with their environment. And this was primarily because the environments of Chicago, the ecosystems that were here, they realized were incredibly fragile. And if they were mistreated to a certain degree, would kill them. It could lead to famine. It could lead to bad farming. It could lead to lack of food, all these sorts of things. And so they, over time, developed a way of life that suited that environment. The first Europeans to arrive in the Chicago area were the French. Now, when the French began showing up in North America, initially, they had a unique colonial mindset, which primarily involved trading with native tribes, working with some groups against others, and a mild attempt to convert them to a French lifestyle. And what this meant was that in the French cities, New Orleans, Quebec, Montreal, Trois-Rivières, you had bastions of French people living in a French society, albeit with a Canadian twist. However, most of your French habitants, the average farmers who lived outside the city, they lived in and amongst native peoples. And what you see, rather than native people converting completely to a French lifestyle, is this beautiful cross-cultural pollination. The French began to speak bits of native languages and dialects worked into their language. They adopt aspects of native dress. They wear breechcloths and blanket leggings and moccasins on their feet. The natives likewise adopt woolen-style clothing, bits of the French language. Some even convert to Catholicism. But these French also begin adopting native lifestyles, native technologies, and native jobs, such as paddling canoes. The famous French voyageurs, these canoe brigades of Frenchmen or mixed-race men who paddle canoes hauling trade goods throughout the interior. They're using birch bark canoes, native technology. They're paddling them and portaging, that's native technology, and they're hauling more or less traditional goods, trade goods, furs, etc. So really, when the first Europeans show up, Chicago life does not change. It's still a portage. It's still a place of thriving life, of nature. However, the next empire to show up is really the United States. We're somewhat late to the game. In 1803, the United States comes in and they begin construction on Fort Dearborn, named for the Secretary of War, Henry Dearborn. And it is the first attempt by the United States to claim the Chicago area as theirs, part of the Northwest Territory. And it's built right where we're standing, right here around Michigan Avenue, Wacker Drive, and what was originally the lakefront on a point there. And the purpose of this fort is to exert control over this area, to establish it as ours. Well, this does not go over so well with the local native tribes. The Potawatomi especially, and the Ojibwe and the Odawa, all are aggravated that the U.S. has come in and is trying to exert control more and more over their movements, over everything. And so by the time of the War of 1812, less than 10 years later, these tribes primarily side with the British against the United States. Fort Dearborn is attacked famously. Many soldiers are killed, others are taken prisoner. The fort is burnt to the ground, and the end of that chapter. However, the United States comes back less than a decade later, and we decide on a new plan to take over this area. Now, it's worth saying that the generation in the United States that's up-and-coming rulers of that time are a new generation that are born after the American Revolution. And they have a unique mindset, a very nationalistic mindset, that they are the generation that is to expand the nation, that is to make it grow and make it to be what it was meant to be. This idea of how to go about that is, to me, epitomized in a speech by a young congressman in 1818 named John C. Calhoun, who stated on the floors of Congress that, quote, "we must conquer space just as we have conquered the natives." And so their idea, in contrary to the native peoples and even the early French settlers, was that in order to make this uniquely ours, we're going to physically change the geography into what we want. Why do we want to use, quote, Indian technology like canoes and Indian jobs like paddling and portaging, hauling Indian goods of trade, goods and furs, when we can use schooners and steamships to haul our goods directly from waterway to waterway, hauling goods such as cut timber from the forests of Michigan, iron ore mined from the upper Great Lakes, and grain grown in the new Midwest. This leads to the building of the town to fuel the first big public works project in this area, Illinois and Michigan Canal, which begins work in 1836, melding the Chicago and the Des Plaines rivers into one continuous waterway.